All right, continuing in domain 1. In this domain, we're going to be talking about developing and implementing a security policy, or in this section, excuse me, talking about developing and implementing a security policy. Pretty short section here. When you think about implementing a policy within your organization, especially if it's particularly related to security and security practices, obviously that policy needs to be somewhat comprehensive. And it can be a single all-encompassing policy, but generally speaking, it's going to be multiple policies that apply to different scenarios and different operations within the organization. Now, we talk about procedures, standards, guidelines, baselines as being defined as an element of or a component of a security policy, and we are going to define the difference between procedures and standards and guidelines and baselines. Procedures certainly would be kind of separate. Those are the actual tasks that we have to enact to be able to adhere to the standards, the guidelines, and the baselines, but we'll talk about the difference between standards, guidelines, and baselines in a little bit. Policies communicate the expectation of how you are supposed to act that are guided through the use of procedures. We create policies typically at a 6th or 8th grade comprehensive level. We want to make sure that everybody can understand. We don't want policies that include a lot of technical jargon or reference, a lot of technical speak. Not that individuals aren't intelligent enough to understand that. We want to make sure that we can apply these policies and guidelines consistently. Generally speaking, if we can write it at an 8th grade level using 8th grade terms, everybody should have an easy, understanding of those guidelines. As a security officer, you are the prime creator. And it could be a collaborative effort, by the way, to collect information from different stakeholders, from different influencers, and so on. But the policy itself, the final product of the policy, should be widely accepted by everyone as a collaborative effort. Human resources are going to be involved, their legal team, your compliance officers, IT subject matter experts, critical business unit leaders, managers, etc. These are all going to be individuals that are going to be contributing to the creation of one or more policies that you enact within an organization. You might also need additional documentation to support policies, which would include legal documents that may not be written necessarily on an 8th grade level, but outline the legal responsibility of all parties involved. It could be, a master services agreement. It could be an SLA document, a non-disclosure agreement. There's all types of different agreements that get drafted and utilized that would supplement or augment whatever kind of general policies that might be generated. Make the policy documents readily available. Make sure that users or employees or anyone that's kind of attached to those policies, make sure they understand those policies, that they're trained. There are checklists in place and checks in place to ensure compliance to policies. Awareness is a key element, right? People have to be aware of what the rules are, particularly when it comes to ethical behavior and what's expected of an individual. There are certainly things that people understand, as a human being in general that they're not supposed to do. But there are a lot of gray areas, taking a nap in your office. Well, yeah, that may not specifically be defined in a policy, but you should be working if you're at the office, not taking a nap, right? So what are essentially the differences between standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines? Well, if we look at the flow here, we have laws, regulations, requirements, organizational goals, and objectives, which can all feed into the creation of an organizational policy, right? Certainly, depending on the business sector you're in, depending on the vertical that you operate in, there could be certain laws and regulations that you have to adhere to as an organization. There could be requirements, state, local, federal, global kind of industry-specific requirements that you have to meet to be able to participate. For example, if we want to be a Cisco partner, we have to have an ethics compliance component within our organization. That's a requirement to become a Cisco partner. So that drives our general organizational policy. Certainly your goals as an organization, your objectives as an organization would also influence what your general organizational policy might be. So the organizational policy is kind of a high level. That would be kind of a statement of how we're going to operate, whereas the functional implementing policies are the how. How do we achieve this general organizational policy? And that includes these elements, right? Standards, procedures, baselines, and guidelines. Standards would be kind of a standard mode of operating. A lot of people kind of confuse the idea of a standard with a baseline. Standard would be kind of a recommended level of operation. Kind of a standard operating procedure, which could include maybe 10 or 15 tasks, as opposed to a baseline, which is a minimal set of whatever it's applied to, right? Could be applied to security standards on a email server. It could be applied to security standards on a Cisco router, baseline, not standard. Baseline, but these would be, in my definition, the minimums, right? They say a consistent level of security. I would say almost a minimum level of security, or we're defining the minimum level of security. The procedures are essentially how we enact the standards and the baselines. What tasks do we implement? What tasks do we take it? Do we process to be able to achieve our goals? And then guidelines would be recommendations, right? A baseline would be more of a requirement. This is the minimum requirement that we need to achieve in order to apply whatever level of security we're trying to apply. But the guideline is really, this is the optimal level of security that we want to achieve, the recommended operating level. All right. By definition, that's the difference between the standards, the procedures, the baselines, and the guidelines.